The coffee cup slipped from Marcus Holloway's weathered hands, shattering against the hardwood floor of his ranch house kitchen. Steam rose from the dark puddle as he stood frozen, staring at Elena Rodriguez through the doorway. She was walking toward the barn, but something was terribly wrong. Her normally graceful stride had become an unsteady shuffle, her left shoulder dipping with each step as if she were carrying an invisible weight. Marcus had seen that walk before, 30 years ago, in his late wife Sarah. His blood ran cold, as a single devastating possibility crept into his mind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Montana morning air carried the scent of sage and distant rain as Marcus stepped onto his porch, boots echoing against the worn planks. His ranch, the Double H, stretched across 15,000 acres of rolling hills and grassland, a legacy passed down through 3 generations of Holloways. At 62, Marcus had spent more years alone on this land than he cared to count, the silence broken only by the lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. Elena had arrived at the Double H 6 months earlier, answering his advertisement for household help in the Billings Gazette. She was 34, soft-spoken, with dark eyes that held stories she never shared. Her references were impeccable, her work ethic unquestionable, and her presence had brought something Marcus hadn't realized he'd been missing: the sound of another human being moving through his empty house. She cleaned with methodical precision, cooked meals that reminded Marcus there was more to eating than opening cans, and maintained the kind of respectful distance that suited them both. Elena lived in the small guest cottage behind the main house, a neat little structure that had housed ranch hands in better times when the Double H employed more than just Marcus and his aging foreman, Dutch Sullivan. The arrangement had worked perfectly until 3 weeks ago, when Marcus first noticed the subtle changes. Elena moved more slowly in the mornings, her hand lingering on doorframes as if steadying herself. She began sitting down more frequently while folding laundry, something she'd never done before. When she thought no one was watching, he caught her pressing her palm against her lower back, her face tightening in what he recognized as carefully controlled pain. Marcus had convinced himself he was imagining things. Elena was a small woman, barely 5'3", and the physical demands of maintaining a ranch house were considerable. Perhaps she was simply tired, overworked. He'd even considered reducing her responsibilities, but every time he brought up the subject, she'd deflect with a smile and assurance that everything was fine. But this morning, watching her navigate the gravel path to the barn with that heartbreakingly familiar unsteadiness, Marcus could no longer deny what his gut had been telling him for weeks. The way she favored her right side, the slight tremor in her left hand when she thought no one was looking, the increasing difficulty she had with tasks that required fine motor control, it all painted a picture he desperately didn't want to see. Sarah had been 36 when the first symptoms appeared. A stumble on the front steps that she'd blamed on her new shoes, a coffee cup that seemed to jump from her hands, handwriting that gradually became more erratic, words trailing off in wobbly lines across the page. The doctors in Billings had been puzzled at first, running test after test while Sarah's condition slowly deteriorated. By the time they'd arrived at a diagnosis, precious months had been lost. Marcus shook his head, trying to dispel the memories that threatened to overwhelm him. He couldn't be certain about Elena's condition based on observation alone. There could be any number of explanations for what he was seeing. A pinched nerve, perhaps, or the after-effects of an old injury she'd never mentioned. But as he watched her struggle with the barn door latch, her fingers fumbling with the simple mechanism she'd operated countless times before, his heart clenched with a familiar dread. The Double H had been in his family since 1892, when his great-grandfather Jeremiah Holloway had claimed the land during the homestead era. 3 generations of Holloways had worked this soil, raised cattle, and built something lasting from the harsh Montana landscape. Marcus had inherited not just the land, but the stubborn independence that came with it. Ranch folk solved their own problems, weathered their own storms, and kept their troubles to themselves. But Sarah's illness had taught him the limits of self-reliance. Some battles couldn't be fought alone. Some problems couldn't be solved with hard work and determination. He'd learned to navigate the complex world of medical specialists, insurance claims, and treatment options. He'd become fluent in the language of degenerative diseases, a vocabulary no rancher should have to master. Elena emerged from the barn, leading Duchess Marcus's favorite mare toward the paddock. Even with the horse's gentle nature, Elena struggled to maintain control of the lead rope. Her left hand kept losing its grip, forcing her to rely increasingly on her right. Marcus noticed how she positioned herself to use the fence posts for support, casual touches that looked natural but served a practical purpose. Dutch Sullivan's pickup truck rattled up the drive, a cloud of dust marking its passage. At 71, Dutch had been working ranches longer than Marcus had been alive, his weathered face a map of decades spent under the Montana sun. He parked near the barn and climbed out with the careful movements of a man whose joints reminded him daily of his age. "Morning, Marcus," Dutch called out, his voice carrying the gravelly tone of someone who'd inhaled his share of dust over the years. "Elena's looking a bit peaked lately. She feeling all right?" Marcus felt his chest tighten. If Dutch had noticed Elena's condition, it was more obvious than he'd hoped. Dutch was observant, but not one to comment on personal matters unless something was seriously amiss. "I've been wondering the same thing," Marcus admitted, watching as Elena carefully made her way back toward the house. "She's been moving different, but she insists everything's fine." Dutch removed his worn Stetson and ran a hand through his sparse gray hair. "My Martha had a cousin with something similar. Started with little things, dropping her keys, stumbling over nothing. Turned out to be something with her nerves." The words hung in the air between them, unspoken implications settling like dust after a windstorm. Marcus had always appreciated Dutch's direct manner, but right now he wished the old cowboy was less perceptive. "Could be anything, though," Dutch added quickly, perhaps sensing Marcus's discomfort. "Might just need some rest, or maybe she's not eating enough. City folk sometimes don't know how to fuel themselves for ranch work." But Elena wasn't city folk, and they both knew it. She'd adapted to ranch life with surprising ease, her movements around the livestock confident and sure. She understood the rhythms of rural living, the early mornings and physical demands. Whatever was affecting her wasn't simple fatigue or inexperience. Marcus spent the morning riding the fence line in the north pasture, checking for winter damage and planning repairs. The physical activity usually helped clear his head, but today, the rhythm of his horse's gait only gave him more time to think. Every memory of Sarah's decline seemed to overlay itself onto his observations of Elena, creating a pattern he couldn't ignore. Sarah had been stubborn about seeking medical attention, insisting that whatever was wrong would resolve itself with time and rest. By the time Marcus had convinced her to see a doctor, the disease had already established itself, stealing away pieces of the woman he loved with ruthless efficiency. He couldn't stand by and watch history repeat itself, not when. Early intervention might make a difference, but Elena wasn't his wife. She was his employee, entitled to her privacy and her own decisions about her health. He had no right to intrude, no standing to demand answers or insist on medical consultations. The boundary between employer and employee was clear and crossing. It could create complications he wasn't prepared to handle. As he guided his horse back toward the barn, Marcus wrestled with the ethical implications of his situation. Elena trusted him enough to work in his home, to live on his property, to share the isolated existence that ranch life demanded. Did that trust create an obligation on his part to act if he suspected she was in danger? Or did respect for her autonomy require him to step back and let her handle her own affairs? The afternoon brought a delivery of feed supplements from the co-op in town. Marcus signed for the shipment while Elena helped the driver unload the heavy bags from his truck. He watched with growing concern as she struggled with the 50-pound sacks, her usual efficiency replaced by careful, deliberate movements that spoke of someone fighting against their own body's limitations. When the driver departed, Elena began stacking the feed bags in the barn storage room. Marcus joined her, lifting the bags she couldn't manage and pretending not to notice her grateful expression. They worked in comfortable silence, a partnership developed over months of shared routine. "Elena," Marcus said as they finished, his voice carefully casual, "you've been working pretty hard lately. Maybe you should take a day or two off, rest up a bit." She turned to face him, those dark eyes studying his expression with an intelligence that made him uncomfortable. Elena had always been perceptive, able to read the undercurrents in conversations that others missed. "I'm fine, Mr. Holloway," she said, her slight accent adding music to the English words. "The work isn't too much for me." But as she spoke, her left hand trembled slightly at her side, a small betrayal that contradicted her words. Marcus pretended not to notice, but the sight sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the Montana weather. "I know you're capable," he said carefully, "but everyone needs a break now and then. This place will survive if you take some time for yourself." Elena smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. "Thank you for your concern, but I prefer to stay busy. Idle hands, as they say." The conversation ended there, but Marcus could feel the weight of unspoken words between them. Elena knew he'd noticed something, and he knew she was deflecting his concerns. It was a delicate dance around a truth neither of them was ready to acknowledge directly. That evening, Marcus sat on his porch as the sun set behind the crazy mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. The ranch was quiet except for the distant sounds of settling cattle and the whisper of wind through the grass. In the guest cottage, Elena's windows glowed with warm light, and he could see her silhouette moving slowly through the small rooms. For 30 years, this porch had been his refuge, a place where he'd processed the challenges and victories of ranch life. He'd sat here through seasons of drought and abundance, through the joy of successful calving seasons and the heartbreak of losing stock to predators or disease. This was where he'd held vigil during Sarah's illness, watching the lights in their bedroom window and praying for miracles that never came. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Now, looking across the yard at Elena's cottage, Marcus felt the familiar weight of helpless concern settling over him like a heavy coat. History seemed to be repeating itself with cruel precision, offering him another chance to watch someone he cared about slowly fade away while he stood powerless to help. The sound of a door closing drew his attention back to the cottage. Elena appeared on her small porch, moving with the careful deliberation that had become her new normal. She stood there for a moment, one hand resting on the railing for support, looking out at the vastness of the Montana landscape that surrounded them both. The following Tuesday brought Dr. Patricia Brennan to the Double H for the quarterly livestock health inspection. At 58, Dr. Brennan had been the region's large animal veterinarian for over 20 years, her no-nonsense approach earning respect from every rancher in 3 counties. Marcus had known her since she'd first arrived fresh out of veterinary school, full of idealism and determination to prove herself in what was still largely a man's profession. As they walked through the cattle pens, checking vaccination records and examining the herd, Marcus found himself studying Dr. Brennan's confident movements. Her hands were steady as she drew blood samples, her gait sure-footed even on the uneven ground of the corral. The contrast with Elena's increasingly uncertain mobility was stark and troubling. "Your stock looks good, Marcus," Dr. Brennan said, sealing the last vial of blood in her testing kit. "Whatever you're doing with their nutrition program is working." "Elena's been managing the feed schedules," Marcus replied, then immediately wondered why he'd brought her up. She's got a real knack for understanding what the animals need. Dr. Brennan glanced toward the house, where Elena could be seen through the kitchen window preparing lunch. She seems like a capable woman. How's she settling into ranch life? The question was casual, but Marcus detected something in the veterinarian's tone that suggested more than polite interest. Dr. Brennan was trained to observe, to notice subtle changes in behavior and movement that might indicate underlying problems. If she'd picked up on Elena's condition during her brief visits to the ranch, it confirmed Marcus's worst fears. "She's been a godsend," Marcus said carefully. "Though I worry she might be pushing herself too hard. City life doesn't really prepare you for the physical demands out here." Dr. Brennan nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. Sometimes the hardest workers are the ones who need the most looking after. They'll push through pain and exhaustion until something forces them to stop. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Brennan had been trying to tell him something without overstepping professional boundaries. Veterinarians dealt with suffering every day, learning to recognize the signs of distress even when their patients couldn't vocalize their pain. Perhaps she'd noticed things about Elena that confirmed his own observations. After Dr. Brennan departed, Marcus found Elena in the kitchen, methodically chopping vegetables for dinner. Her knife work, once precise and efficient, had become slower and more deliberate. She gripped the handle tighter than necessary, her knuckles white with the effort of maintaining control. "Smells good," Marcus said, settling into his usual chair. At the kitchen table, "What are we having?" "Beef stew with root vegetables," Elena replied, not looking up from her work. "Dutch mentioned he'd had a hard day with the irrigation system, so I thought something hearty would be appropriate." It was typical of Elena to consider others in her meal planning, another small kindness that had made her presence at the ranch so welcome. But as Marcus watched her work, he noticed how she braced her left elbow against the counter for stability, compensating for the weakness that seemed to be progressing faster than he'd hoped. "Elena," he began, then stopped, unsure how to proceed. "Is there anything you need from town? I'm planning a supply run tomorrow." She paused in her chopping, considering the question with unusual care. Perhaps some of that liniment from Peterson's pharmacy. The eucalyptus kind, for sore muscles. The admission was small but significant. Elena rarely asked for anything personal, preferring to handle her own needs with quiet independence. If she was willing to acknowledge muscle soreness, the reality was likely much worse than she was letting on. "Of course," Marcus said. "Anything else?" Elena shook her head, returning to her vegetables with renewed focus. But Marcus noticed how she favored her right hand even more now, the left serving mainly as a guide rather than actively participating in the cutting motion. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. That evening, Marcus made a decision that had been building for weeks. He drove into Billings, navigating the familiar streets to the medical complex where Sarah had received much of her treatment. Dr. Elizabeth Chen had been Sarah's neurologist, a brilliant woman who'd fought alongside them through every stage of the disease. She'd retired 2 years earlier, but Marcus still had her personal number. "Marcus Holloway," Dr. Chun's voice carried warmth despite the late hour. "How are you managing?" "It's been too long since we talked." "I'm doing all right, Elizabeth. But I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll forgive me for calling so late." "Of course. What's troubling you?" Marcus chose his words carefully, describing Elena's symptoms without identifying her by name or revealing too many personal details. He spoke of the unsteady gait, the tremor, the difficulty with fine motor tasks, painting a clinical picture that stripped away the emotional weight of his observations. Dr. Chen listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification about specific details. When Marcus finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You understand I can't provide A diagnosis based on second-hand observations, she said finally. But the constellation of symptoms you're describing could indicate several different conditions, some more serious than others. I know, Marcus replied. I'm not asking for a diagnosis. I'm asking for advice. If someone you cared about was showing these signs, what would you tell them? I'd tell them that early intervention can make a significant difference in many neurological conditions, Dr. Chun said gently. I'd tell them that whatever they're facing, they don't have to face it alone, and I'd tell them that hope is never misplaced, even in the face of uncertainty. The conversation continued for another few minutes, with Dr. Chun providing the names of current specialists and resources that might be helpful. When Marcus finally hung up, he felt both relief and apprehension. He'd confirmed his suspicions, but he was no closer to knowing how to help Elena without violating her privacy or damaging their working relationship. The next morning brought a spring thunderstorm that rattled the windows of the ranch house and sent the cattle huddling together in whatever shelter they could find. Marcus stood at the kitchen window, watching sheets of rain sweep across the pastures, when he noticed Elena struggling with the back door. The wind had caught it, and she couldn't maintain her grip on the handle long enough to secure the latch. Without thinking, Marcus moved to help her, his larger frame easily managing what had become impossible for her. They stood close for a moment, both of them breathing hard from the effort of fighting the wind, and Marcus could see the frustration and fear in Elena's eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly, but there was something in her voice that suggested she was thanking him for more than just helping with the door. "Storm's supposed to blow through by afternoon," Marcus said, giving her space to regain her composure. "Dutch and I will check the fences once it clears." Elena nodded, but instead of moving away, she remained standing near the door, watching the rain with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. There was longing there, perhaps, or regret. It was the look of someone saying goodbye to something they couldn't bear to lose. "Mr. Holloway," she said, still not looking at him, "may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "When your wife was ill, how did you know when it was time to accept help?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. Sarah had asked him something similar during her final year, when the progression of her disease had made independence impossible. It had been one of the hardest conversations of his life. "Sarah was stubborn," Marcus said carefully. "She wanted to handle everything herself for as long as possible. I think she was afraid that accepting help meant giving up hope." Elena turned to face him, her dark eyes searching his expression. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her that accepting help wasn't giving up. It was choosing to fight smarter instead of harder. That there was no shame in using every resource available to maintain the life she wanted to live." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away, but not before Marcus saw the acknowledgement there. She knew that he knew, and she knew that he understood what she was facing. "Thank you," she said again, and this time Marcus was certain. She wasn't talking about the door. The storm passed as predicted, leaving the ranch washed clean and sparkling under the afternoon sun. Marcus and Dutch spent hours repairing fence damage and checking on livestock, but Marcus's mind kept returning to his conversation with Elena. Something had shifted between them, an unspoken understanding that changed the dynamic of their relationship. They returned to the house for dinner. Elena had prepared a feast that seemed to celebrate the clearing of the storm. Roasted chicken with herbs from her small garden, fresh bread that filled the house with its warm aroma, and apple pie made from fruit she'd preserved the previous fall. It was the kind of meal that spoke of abundance and gratitude, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that it was also a farewell of sorts. "This is incredible, Elena," Dutch said, helping himself to a second serving of everything. "You've outdone yourself." Elena smiled, but Marcus noticed how she picked at her own food, her appetite apparently diminished by whatever thoughts were occupying her mind. Her left hand rested in her lap, no longer trusted to hold utensils with any reliability. After Dutch departed for his own small house on the property, Marcus and Elena cleared the dishes together in companionable silence. It had become their evening routine, a domestic partnership that had evolved naturally over the months of her employment. But tonight, the ritual felt different, charged with the weight of things unsaid. "Elena," Marcus began as they finished, "the last of the washing up. I want you to know that whatever you're dealing with, you don't have to face it alone. This ranch, this community, we take care of our own." She turned to face him, tears threatening again. "You're very kind, Mr. Holloway, but I'm not your responsibility. Maybe not legally," Marcus said. "But that's not the only kind of responsibility that matters. You've become part of this place, part of what makes it home. That counts for something." Elena was quiet for a long moment, her hands gripping the edge of the sink for support. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared of what's happening to me, and I'm scared of being a burden to anyone else. I've always taken care of myself." "Fear is reasonable," Marcus said gently. "But isolation isn't the answer. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let other people help you carry the load." The conversation ended there, but Marcus could see that something had been set in motion. Elena's walls were beginning to crack, and the truth she'd been hiding was starting to emerge. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they'd taken the first tentative steps toward facing them together. As Elena made her way slowly to the guest cottage, Marcus remained on the porch, watching the stars emerge. In the clear post-storm sky, the ranch felt different somehow, as if the storm had washed away more than just the dust and debris. Change was coming to the Double H, and Marcus found himself both dreading and anticipating what the morning might bring. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard as Marcus emerged from the barn, a heavy tool belt slung around his waist. The irrigation system in the south pasture had been acting up for weeks, and today he was determined to solve the problem once and for all. Dutch was already waiting by the pickup truck, a thermos of coffee and a bag of Elena's homemade biscuits. On the hood. "She's up early again," Dutch commented, nodding toward the guest cottage where Elena's silhouette moved behind the curtained windows. "Saw her lights on before 5 this morning," Marcus frowned. Elena had always been an early riser, but lately she seemed to be getting less sleep rather than more. He'd noticed the fatigue in her face, the way she moved even more slowly in the mornings, as if her body was rebelling against the demands of consciousness. "Pain keeps people awake," Marcus said, more to himself than to Dutch. The older man nodded. Grimly, "My Martha used to pace the house at night when her arthritis was bad. Said lying still made everything hurt worse." They loaded their tools and drove toward the problematic irrigation line, the truck bouncing over ruts left by the recent storm. The morning air was crisp with the promise of another hot day, meadowlarks calling from fence posts as they passed. It was the kind of morning that should have lifted Marcus's spirits, but his mind remained focused on the woman he'd left behind at the house. The irrigation repair took most of the morning, involving a complex dance of digging, pipe replacement, and system testing that left both men covered in mud and thoroughly satisfied with their work. It was the kind of physical problem that yielded to effort and expertise, the sort of challenge that ranch life offered in abundance. If only human difficulties could be solved with the same straightforward approach. When they returned to the house for lunch, they found Elena in the kitchen, but something was immediately wrong. She stood at the stove with her back to them, her posture rigid with concentration as she stirred a pot of soup. But her movements were jerky, uncontrolled, and Marcus could see the tremor that ran through her entire left side. "Elena?" Marcus called softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned too quickly, the wooden spoon flying from her grasp to clatter across the floor. Her face was flushed with embarrassment and frustration, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "I'm Sorry, she said, her voice shaking. I was just ... The spoon wouldn't. Dutch had the good sense to make himself scarce, mumbling something about checking on the horses and disappearing through the back door. Marcus approached Elena carefully, the way he might approach a wounded animal, with respect for her dignity and awareness of her pain. It's all right, he said gently, retrieving the spoon and setting it on the counter. Accidents happen. But they both knew this wasn't an accident. Elena's condition was progressing, and the careful control she'd maintained for months was beginning to slip. The facade of normalcy that had protected them both from uncomfortable truths was crumbling. I should go, Elena said suddenly, her words rushing together. I should pack my things and leave today. You need someone who can actually do the job you're paying for. Stop, Marcus said, his voice carrying an authority that made Elena freeze. You're not going anywhere. Not like this, not alone. Elena's composure finally broke. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her small frame shaking with suppressed sobs. You don't understand. I can't keep pretending everything is fine. I can't keep lying to you. Marcus pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, his weathered hands folded on the table between them. Then don't pretend. Don't lie. Tell me what's really happening. For a long moment, Elena couldn't speak. She stared at her hands, watching the involuntary tremor that had become impossible to hide. When she finally looked up, her eyes held a mixture of fear and relief that Marcus recognized from his own mirror during Sarah's illness. 3 months before I came here, Elena began, her voice barely audible. I was working for a family in Denver, the Whitmore family. I'd been their housekeeper for 5 years, and I loved that job. I loved those children like they were my own. She paused, gathering strength for what came next. Mrs. Whitmore noticed it first. I was dusting the piano, and my hand started shaking so badly I nearly knocked over a family photo. She was kind about it, suggested I see a doctor for stress or fatigue. Marcus remained silent, sensing that Elena needed to tell this story in her own way, at her own pace. The first doctor said it was nothing. Overwork, maybe. Suggested vitamins and rest, but it kept getting worse. The tremor, the stiffness in my muscles, the way my handwriting started to look like a child's scribbles. Elena's voice grew stronger. As she continued, as if speaking the truth was giving her strength she hadn't known she possessed. The second doctor knew immediately. Dr. Rebecca Martinez at Denver General. She took one look at me walking into her office and ordered a dozen tests. Blood work, brain scans, things I'd never heard of. But she already knew. What did she find? Marcus asked gently. Parkinson's disease, Elena said, the words falling between them like stones into still water. Early onset. I'm only 34, Mr. Holloway. Most people don't develop it until they're much older. Marcus felt the familiar punch of recognition. The same sensation he'd experienced when Sarah's doctors had finally named her enemy. Different disease, same devastating impact on a life barely begun. The Whitmores were wonderful about it, Elena continued. They offered to keep me on, modify my duties, whatever I needed. But I couldn't bear the pity in their eyes. I couldn't stand watching the children realize that their Elena was broken. So you left, Marcus said, understanding beginning to dawn. I took my savings and ran. I thought maybe if I went somewhere nobody knew me, somewhere I could start fresh, I could outrun it somehow. Stupid, I know, but I wasn't thinking clearly. Elena wiped her eyes with a napkin, her movements still careful and deliberate. I found your ad in the paper and thought a ranch would be perfect. Physical work, honest work, in a place where people minded their own business. I thought I could handle it for a while, save some money, figure out what to do next. But it's getting worse, Marcus observed. Faster than the doctors predicted, Elena confirmed. Dr. Martinez said I might have years before it became seriously debilitating. But some cases progress more rapidly, especially in younger patients. Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing this information. Parkinson's disease was different from what Sarah had faced, but the trajectory was similarly cruel, a gradual theft of independence, dignity, and hope. "What's your treatment plan?" he asked. Elena's laugh was bitter. "Treatment requires insurance, Mr. Holloway, or significant money. I have neither." The simple statement hit Marcus like a slap. He'd been so focused on the medical aspects of Elena's condition that he'd failed to consider the practical realities. Elena was working for him without health benefits, living paycheck to paycheck while battling a disease that required expensive, ongoing medical care. "The medication that might slow the progression costs more than I make in 3 months," Elena continued. "The specialists want to see me every few weeks. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, counseling. It all adds up to amounts I can't imagine affording." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his mind racing through possibilities and implications. Elena had trusted him with her secret, laid bare her vulnerability and fear. Now the question was what he intended to do with that trust. "Dr. Martinez gave me pamphlets about support groups and financial assistance programs," Elena said, pulling a folded envelope from her pocket. "But most of them have waiting lists or requirements I don't meet. I'm not old enough, not poor enough, not sick enough yet." She spread the pamphlets on the table between them, a collection of bureaucratic promises and medical jargon that reduced her condition to statistics and eligibility criteria. "I've been researching on the library computer in town," Elena continued, "trying to understand what's ahead for me. The progression varies, but eventually—" She trailed off, unable to voice the future that awaited her. Marcus reached across the table and covered her trembling hand with his own. "Eventually is not today," he said firmly. "Today we focus on what we can control." Elena looked up at him with surprise. "We? You think I'm going to let you face this alone? After everything you've done for this place, for me?" Marcus shook his head. "That's not how we do things here." For the first time since her breakdown began, Elena smiled. It was a small, fragile thing, but it transformed her face and reminded Marcus of the confident woman who'd arrived at his ranch 6 months earlier. "I don't know what I can offer you anymore," Elena said. "My hands shake so badly some mornings. I can't button my own shirt. I stumble over nothing. I drop things, forget things, get confused about simple tasks I've done 1,000 times before." "You offer more than you realize," Marcus replied. "This place was just a collection of buildings and livestock before you arrived. You made it a home again. That has value beyond any job description." Elena's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these seemed different, tears of gratitude rather than despair. "Mrs. Whitmore said something similar when I left Denver," Elena said softly. "She told me that I'd given her family more than clean floors and folded laundry. She said I'd given them stability, peace of mind, a sense that their home was truly cared for." "She was right," Marcus said. "And that doesn't change because you have Parkinson's. If anything, it makes it more remarkable." The afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen windows, casting warm light across the table where they sat. Outside, the ranch continued its ancient rhythms, cattle grazing in distant pastures, horses dozing in the shade, the endless cycle of life that had sustained the double H for generations. "So what happens now?" Elena asked. Marcus stood up, his decision crystallizing as he moved. "Now we make some phone calls. We get you connected with Dr. Martinez again, set up a treatment plan that makes sense. We figure out the insurance situation. Look into those assistance programs." "Mr. Holloway, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," Marcus interrupted. "I'm telling you how it's going to be. This ranch takes care of its people, Elena. That's not charity, it's family." Elena stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of pity or obligation. Whatever she saw, there seemed to satisfy her because she nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said simply. "Don't thank me yet," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "Wait until you see me trying to navigate the health insurance bureaucracy. You might change your mind about wanting my help." For the first time in weeks, Elena laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that filled the kitchen with warmth. It was a small victory, but Marcus would take whatever hope he could find. The Denver Medical Center's neurology department was a maze of sterile corridors and humming fluorescent lights that made Marcus's skin crawl. He'd driven Elena the 4-hour journey that morning, both of them silent for most of the trip as they watched the Montana landscape give way to Colorado's urban sprawl. Now, sitting in Dr. Rebecca Martinez's waiting room, Marcus felt the familiar anxiety that medical facilities always triggered in him. Elena sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap to minimize the tremor that had worsened over the body tightly in her lap to minimize the tremor that had worsened over the past 2 weeks since her confession. She wore her best dress, a navy blue number with small white flowers that she'd pressed carefully the night before. Marcus understood the impulse when facing an uncertain future. Maintaining dignity in small ways became critically important. "Elena Rodriguez?" A nurse called from the doorway, her voice professionally cheerful. They stood together, Elena accepting Marcus's steadying arm as they followed the nurse through a series of turns that led to Dr. Martinez's office. The neurologist was younger than Marcus had expected, perhaps 45, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and intelligent brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Elena," Dr. Martinez said warmly, rising from behind her desk. "I'm so glad you came back, and you must be Mr. Holloway." Marcus shook the doctor's firm hand, appreciating her direct manner. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice. Please, sit down." Dr. Martinez gestured to 2 chairs facing her desk. "Elena, you look well. How have you been managing since we last spoke?" Elena's composure wavered slightly. "Some days are better than others. The tremor is more noticeable now, and I have trouble with fine motor tasks. Cooking, cleaning, things I used to do without thinking." Dr. Martinez nodded, making notes on Elena's chart. "That's consistent with disease progression. Have you been taking any medication?" "No," Elena admitted. "I couldn't afford the prescriptions after I left the Whitmores." The doctor's expression tightened with what Marcus recognized as controlled frustration. He'd seen the same look on Sarah's doctors' faces when insurance complications delayed treatment or forced them to choose less effective options due to cost constraints. "We need to address that immediately," Dr. Martinez said. Carbidopa-levodopa can significantly slow symptom progression, especially when started early. There are also patient assistance programs that can help with costs. She pulled out several forms and began explaining the medication options, dosage schedules, and potential side effects. Marcus took notes, his engineer's mind organizing the information into manageable categories. Elena listened intently, asking occasional questions that revealed her own research into her condition. "I also want to refer you to our movement disorder clinic," Dr. Martinez continued. "Physical therapy specifically designed for Parkinson's patients can help maintain mobility and reduce fall risk. Occupational therapy can teach adaptive techniques for daily activities." "Doctor," Marcus interjected, "what are we looking at long term? Elena deserves to know what she's facing." Dr. Martinez set down her pen and looked directly at Elena. "Parkinson's progression varies significantly between patients. Early onset cases like yours can be unpredictable. Some people maintain good function for decades with proper treatment. Others progress more rapidly. And me specifically?" Elena asked quietly. "Your symptoms have progressed faster than I'd hoped over the past 6 months," Dr. Martinez admitted. "But that doesn't mean the pattern will continue. With medication and therapy, we might slow things considerably. The word might hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of uncertainty that defined chronic illness. Marcus had learned to hate that word during Sarah's treatment, the way doctors used it to offer hope without making promises they couldn't keep. After the appointment, they stopped at the hospital pharmacy to fill Elena's prescriptions. The cost, even with the assistance program discount, was staggering. Marcus quietly handed over his credit card before Elena could object, ignoring her whispered protests. "We'll figure out the finances later," he told her as they walked back to his truck. "Right now we focus on getting you stabilized." The drive back to Montana was different from the morning journey. Elena seemed lighter somehow, as if sharing her burden with medical professionals had lifted some invisible weight from her shoulders. She talked about the physical therapy exercises Dr. Martinez had demonstrated, the dietary recommendations, the importance of maintaining social connections and meaningful activities. She said isolation is one of the worst things for Parkinson's patients. Elena said as they crossed the state line back into Montana, that staying engaged with life and other people can actually slow cognitive decline. Marcus glanced at her, noting the subtle change in her posture. "Good thing you're living on a working ranch then. Plenty of engagement here." Elena smiled, the first truly relaxed expression he'd seen from her in weeks. "I was thinking about that. Maybe I could take on some different responsibilities as my condition changes. Things that don't require as much fine motor control." "Like what?" "Well, I've always been good with animals. Maybe I could help with the horses more, or work with the cattle. I know I can't do heavy lifting, but there are other ways to contribute." Marcus felt a surge of admiration for Elena's determination to adapt rather than surrender. It reminded him of Sarah's attitude during her better days, when she'd focused on what she could still do rather than mourning what she'd lost. They arrived back at the Double H as the sun was setting, painting the ranch buildings in shades of gold and amber. Dutch was waiting on the porch, his expression anxious until he saw them both emerge from the truck safely. "How'd it go?" he asked without preamble. "Better than expected," Marcus replied, helping Elena with her bag of medications. "Doc says with proper treatment, Elena should be able to maintain her quality of life for a good while yet." Dutch's weathered face creased into a smile. "That's the best news I've heard all week. Martha's been worrying herself sick about you. Elena, she's got half the church ladies organizing a meal train whether you want it or not." Elena laughed, the sound carrying across the ranch yard like music. "Please tell Martha, that's very kind. But not necessary. I'm still perfectly capable of cooking." "You try telling Martha what's necessary and see how far it gets you," Dutch chuckled. "She's already planned 3 casseroles and a pot roast." That evening, as Elena organized her new medications and therapy schedules, Marcus sat on his porch, reviewing the mountain of paperwork from their Denver trip. Insurance forms, therapy referrals, medication schedules, and follow-up appointments created a complex web of medical management that would require careful coordination. His phone rang. Interrupting his document sorting, Dr. Chun's name appeared on the screen. "Marcus, how did the appointment go today?" He'd called Dr. Chin the previous evening to update her on Elena's situation and ask for advice about navigating the medical system. Her offer to help coordinate care had been another unexpected kindness. "Better than I hoped," Marcus replied. Dr. Martinez got Elena started on medication and referred her to their movement disorder clinic. "She thinks we caught it early enough to make a real difference." "That's excellent news. Early intervention is crucial with Parkinson's." "How is Elena handling the diagnosis emotionally?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "She's scared, but she's also relieved to have answers. The uncertainty was killing her. At least now she knows what she's fighting." "That's very normal," Dr. Chun assured him. "The fear will ebb and flow, but having a treatment plan helps tremendously." "What about you? How are you processing all this?" The question caught Marcus off guard. Everyone had been focused on Elena's needs, understandably, But Dr. Chen was the first person to acknowledge that he was affected too. It brings back memories, he admitted. Different disease but similar feelings of helplessness. I keep wanting to fix things that can't be fixed. That's natural too, Dr. Chen said gently. But remember, you're not helpless. You're providing Elena with something invaluable: stability, support, and dignity. Those things matter more than you might realize. After ending the call, Marcus remained on the porch, watching the lights in Elena's cottage. She was moving around inside, probably organizing her new routines and adjusting to the reality of her diagnosis. Tomorrow would bring the first day of her medication regimen, the beginning of a new phase in their lives at the H. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Father Miguel Santos from St. Catherine's in town pulled his dusty sedan up to the ranch house, his black cassock incongruous against the rural setting. Marcus knew the priest slightly. He'd officiated at several local funerals and was known for his practical approach to ministry. "Mr. Holloway," Father Santos said, climbing out of his car, "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. Martha Sullivan mentioned that Miss Rodriguez might appreciate a visit." Marcus wasn't surprised that word had spread through the community. Rural areas thrived on networks of mutual support, and Elena's situation would naturally trigger the protective instincts of longtime residents. "She's in the kitchen," Marcus said, leading the priest toward the house. "Fair warning, she's pretty independent-minded. Might not appreciate feeling like a charity case." Father Santos smiled. "I've been ministering in ranch country for 15 years. I know something about independent-minded people." They found Elena preparing lunch, her movements careful but steady. The first dose of her new medication seemed to be helping already, or perhaps it was simply the psychological benefit of finally taking action against her disease. "Elena," Marcus said, "Father Santos is here to see you." Elena turned, her expression wary. "Father, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not much of a churchgoer." "Neither am I, to be honest," Father Santos replied with a grin. "Too many early morning services. But I'm not here about church. I'm here about community." Elena's wariness softened slightly. "I don't understand." "Martha Sullivan has been organizing half the county to help you," the priest explained. "Meal trains, transportation to medical appointments, household assistance when you need it. She sent me to make sure you understand this isn't charity. It's what neighbors do for each other." "But I'm not really from here," Elena protested. "I've only been on the ranch for 6 months." "Doesn't matter," Father Santos said firmly. "You're here now, you're part of the community. That makes you family, whether you like it or not." Marcus watched Elena process this information, seeing the conflict between her fierce independence and her growing need for support play out across her expressive face. "I don't want to be a burden," she said finally. "Then don't be one," Father Santos replied bluntly. "Accept help gracefully, contribute what you can when you can, and let people care about you. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is allowing them to help." The conversation continued for another hour, with Father Santos explaining the informal support network that rural communities created for their members. It wasn't organized charity, but rather an organic system of mutual aid that had sustained ranch families for generations. After the priest departed, Elena and Marcus finished preparing lunch in comfortable silence. The dynamic between them had shifted again, evolving from employer-employee to something more complex and familial. "He's right, you know," Elena said as they sat down to eat, "about letting people help. I've spent so long taking care of myself that I forgot how to accept care from others." Marcus nodded, understanding her struggle intimately. "It's one of the hardest lessons to learn. Took me years to accept help during Sarah's illness, and even then I fought it every step of the way." "How did you finally learn?" "Sarah made me understand that refusing help wasn't protecting my pride. It was stealing other people's opportunity to show love." When you prevent someone from helping, you're actually being selfish. Elena considered this wisdom while they ate the ranch. Quiet around them, except for the distant sounds of cattle and the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. Change was coming to the Double H, but for the first time since Elena's diagnosis, it felt like change they could manage together. The physical therapy clinic in Billings hummed with quiet activity as Elena worked through her exercises under the watchful eye of therapist Jennifer Walsh. 2 months had passed since the Denver appointment, and Elena's medication had stabilized many of her symptoms, though her left side remained noticeably weaker than her right. The specialized exercises were designed to maintain her mobility and prevent the muscle rigidity that often accompanied Parkinson's progression. Remember to think big with your movements, Jennifer instructed as Elena practiced walking exercises. Parkinson's tends to make everything smaller. Your steps, your arm swings, even your handwriting. We want to counteract that tendency. Marcus watched from a nearby chair, marveling at Elena's determination. She approached each exercise with the same methodical precision she'd once brought to housework, treating physical therapy as another job to be mastered. Her improvements were subtle but measurable. Better balance, more confident movements, increased stamina. "How's the tremor control?" Jennifer asked, observing Elena's hands as she performed fine motor exercises with colored blocks. "Much better." "In the mornings after medication," Elena replied, concentrating on stacking the blocks in specific patterns. "Afternoons are harder, but still manageable." "That's typical," Jennifer nodded. "As we progress, we'll work on strategies for managing those off-medication periods. The goal is maintaining function throughout the day." After the session, Elena and Marcus stopped at the feed store to pick up supplements for the cattle. The autumn roundup was approaching, and preparations consumed most of Marcus's attention these days. Elena insisted on helping with the planning, her organizational skills proving invaluable even as her physical contributions necessarily evolved. "I've been thinking about the rotation schedule," Elena said as they loaded 50-pound bags into the truck bed. Marcus handled the heavy lifting while Elena managed the paperwork and directed the loading. "If we move the yearlings to the north, pasture first, we can use the south fields for the breeding stock during the worst of the weather." Marcus paused in his lifting, impressed by Elena's grasp of ranch management complexities. She'd been quietly studying their operation for months, learning the rhythms and requirements that govern successful cattle ranching. "That's actually brilliant," he admitted. "Dutch and I have been doing it the same way for 20 years, but your approach makes more sense." Elena beamed at the compliment, her confidence growing as she found new ways to contribute meaningfully to ranch operations. The transition from housekeeper to ranch partner had been gradual but undeniable. On the drive home, they discussed the upcoming visit from Marcus's sister Rebecca Thompson, who lived in Seattle and hadn't been to the ranch in over 3 years. Rebecca had called the previous week, announcing her intention to spend Thanksgiving at the Double H Marcus suspected she'd heard about Elena's situation through the extended family network and was coming to investigate. "She means well," Marcus explained as they turned onto the ranch road. "But Rebecca has strong opinions about how people should handle their problems. She's used to fixing things in her world of corporate consulting." "You're worried she'd disapprove of our arrangement," Elena observed. Marcus nodded reluctantly. "Rebecca thinks I should have sold this place after Sarah died, moved to town, simplified my life. She's going to see you as another complication. I can't afford." Elena was quiet for several minutes, watching the familiar landscape roll past. The cottonwoods had turned golden with autumn, and the grass in the pastures had taken on the brown hue that signaled winter's approach. "Maybe she's right," Elena said finally. "Maybe I am a complication you don't need." "Don't even think that," Marcus replied firmly. "This ranch is more alive now than it's been in years. Rebecca will see that when she gets here." But privately, Marcus shared Elena's concerns. Rebecca was practical to a fault, and the financial realities of supporting Elena's medical needs while maintaining ranch operations were undeniably challenging. Health insurance premiums, medication costs, and therapy sessions added up to substantial monthly expenses that strained the ranch's already tight budget. That evening, Marcus found Elena in the barn working with Duchess, the gentle mare who had become Elena's particular favorite. Elena's movements around the horse were confident despite her physical limitations, her voice soothing as she brushed the animal's coat. "She's responding well to you," Marcus observed, leaning against the stall door. "Horses don't judge," Elena replied, continuing her grooming. "They don't care if your hands shake or if you move slowly. They just want consistency and kindness." Marcus watched Elena work, noting how she'd adapted her techniques to accommodate her tremor. Instead of long, flowing brushstrokes, she used shorter movements that she could control more easily. The result was just as effective, simply different. "Elena," Marcus began, then stopped, unsure how to voice his concerns about Rebecca's visit. "You're worried about your sister," Elena said, without looking up from her work. "You think she'll convince you to send me away. That's not going to happen," Marcus said immediately. "But what if she's right? What if keeping me here is preventing you from making better decisions about your future?" Marcus entered the stall and picked up a second brush, working on Duchess's other side. "Do you remember what you told me about the Whitmore family? How they offered to keep you on despite your diagnosis?" Elena nodded, her hands never pausing, in their gentle rhythm. "You said you couldn't bear the pity in their eyes," Marcus continued. "That you felt like broken Elena instead of just Elena. Do you feel that way here?" Elena considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "Here I feel like Elena who happens to have Parkinson's. It's part of me, but it's not all of me." "Then Rebecca can think whatever she wants," Marcus concluded. "This is my ranch, my decision, and my family. She doesn't get a vote." The next morning brought Dutch with news that the cattle in the east pasture had broken through a section of fence during the night. Several head had wandered onto the neighboring property, requiring immediate attention before they caused problems. "With the Hendersons' prize bull. We'll need all hands for this one," Dutch said, accepting a cup of Elena's coffee. "Those steers are scattered across half a section, and some of them are pretty worked up." Elena looked up from her breakfast preparations. "I could help. I might not be able to rope cattle, but I can spot them from horseback and radio positions." Marcus started to object, protective instincts flaring, but the look in Elena's eyes stopped him. She needed to feel useful, to contribute in ways that mattered. Wrapping her in cotton wouldn't serve anyone's interests. "All right," he agreed, "but you stay well back from any action. Spotting and communication only." The cattle roundup took most of the morning, with Elena proving invaluable as a mobile coordinator. Her clear, calm voice over the radio helped Dutch, and Marcus tracked down scattered animals efficiently, and her eye for detail caught subtle signs that might have been missed otherwise. "Looks like 3 more head down by the creek," Elena's voice crackled through the radio. "They're nervous but not spooked. If you approach from the north, you should be able to guide them back toward the gap." Marcus smiled as he followed her directions, amazed at how naturally Elena had taken to ranch work. She understood cattle behavior intuitively, reading the animals' moods and movements with surprising accuracy. By noon, they had all the escaped cattle back where they belonged, and the fence temporarily repaired. Elena's face was flushed with excitement and accomplishment, her tremor barely noticeable in the aftermath of useful activity. "You've got a real gift for this," Dutch told her as they unsaddled their horses. "Been ranching for 50 years, and I've rarely seen someone pick up cattle scent so fast." Elena's smile could have powered the ranch house. "It feels right," she said simply. "Like this is what I was meant to be doing." That afternoon, as they worked on permanent fence repairs, Marcus reflected on the morning's events. Elena had found Her place at the Double H, not as a replacement for what she'd lost, but as something entirely new. She was becoming a rancher in her own right, bringing fresh perspectives and genuine enthusiasm to work that had grown routine for him. And, Dutch, the sound of a car engine interrupted his thoughts. A silver SUV with Washington plates was coming. Up the drive, dust trailing behind it like a banner. Rebecca had arrived a day early, as was her habit. She preferred to catch people unprepared, claiming it gave her a more accurate picture of their real circumstances. Marcus climbed down from the fence, post he'd been repairing, and walked toward the house, where Rebecca was already emerging from. Her vehicle. At 57, she remained striking, her graying hair cut in a sharp bob, and her clothes expensive, even for ranch visiting. She surveyed the property with the assessing gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating business ventures. "Marcus," she called out, her voice carrying the slight edge it always held when she visited the ranch. "The place looks good, better than I expected." "Hello, Rebecca," Marcus replied, accepting her brief hug. "You're early." "Flight got in ahead of schedule, so I decided to drive straight out." "Where's this housekeeper I've been hearing about?" Elena appeared from the barn, leading Duchess toward the paddock. Even at a distance, Rebecca's trained eye would pick up the subtle signs of Elena's condition, the careful movements, the slight tremor, the way she used the horse for additional stability. "That's Elena Rodriguez," Marcus said, watching his sister's expression carefully. "She's been with us for 8 months now." Rebecca studied Elena with unconcealed interest. "She looks young, and if the family gossip is accurate, she's sick." "She has Parkinson's disease," Marcus confirmed. "But she's managing well with treatment." "Parkinson's," Rebecca repeated, her tone neutral but her implications clear. "That's progressive, isn't it?" "Gets worse over time, like a lot of things," Marcus replied evenly. "We deal with what we're given." Elena had noticed their conversation and was walking toward them, her posture straight despite the afternoon fatigue that made her symptoms more pronounced. Marcus felt a surge of pride at her composure and dignity. "You must be Rebecca," Elena said, extending her hand with only the slightest tremor visible. "Marcus has told me so much about you. Welcome to the Double H." Rebecca shook Elena's hand, her business training allowing her to mask her assessment behind polite conversation. "Thank you. I understand you've been helping Marcus manage the household." "Among other things," Elena replied calmly. "I've been learning ranch work as well. This morning I helped with a cattle roundup." Rebecca's eyebrows rose slightly. "That seems ambitious." "Elena has real talent for working with livestock," Marcus interjected, hearing the subtle challenge in his sister's tone. "She's becoming quite an asset to the operation." The three of them stood in the ranch yard, autumn wind stirring the dust. Between them, each measuring the others and preparing for conversations that would shape the future of the Double H. Elena's diagnosis had brought them to this moment. But Marcus sensed that what happened next would depend on much more than medical realities. The first frost of the season clung to the ranch house windows as Rebecca Thompson sat at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee before her and a stack of financial documents spread across the surface. She'd been at the Double H for 3 days, and her corporate instincts had kicked into full gear, analyzing everything from feed costs to medication expenses with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant. Elena moved quietly around the kitchen, preparing breakfast while trying to ignore the weight of Rebecca's scrutiny. Every tremor, every careful movement, every moment of hesitation was being cataloged and evaluated. Elena had faced judgment before, but rarely from someone with Rebecca's particular combination of intelligence and disapproval. "These medical expenses are significant," Rebecca said without preamble, not looking up from the spreadsheets she'd created. "Between insurance premiums, medications, and therapy sessions, you're looking at nearly $1,500 a month. That's more than most ranch hands make." Marcus entered from the mudroom, stamping frost from his boots. Good morning to you too, Rebecca. I'm being practical, not rude, Rebecca replied crisply. Someone needs to look at the numbers objectively. Elena set a plate of eggs and bacon in front of Rebecca, her movements steady despite the tension in the room. The financial burden is something I think about every day, Mrs. Thompson. I've offered repeatedly to find other arrangements. But Marcus won't hear of it, Rebecca observed, finally looking up from her papers. He's always been too sentimental for his own good. There's nothing sentimental about recognizing value, Marcus said, pouring himself coffee. Elena contributes more to this operation than any employee I've ever had. Rebecca's laugh was sharp. She's a housekeeper with a degenerative disease, Marcus. How exactly does that translate to operational value? Elena's jaw tightened, but she continued her breakfast preparations without comment. Marcus felt his temper rising, the protective instincts that had been building for months finally reaching their limit. Yesterday, Elena spotted a potential breach in the north fence that Dutch and I completely missed, Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled. Her livestock instincts prevented what could have been a major loss. Last week, she redesigned our feeding schedule and saved us 2 hours of daily labor. She's been researching sustainable grazing practices and found methods that could increase our carrying capacity by 15%. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. All very impressive, assuming she can continue performing at that level. What happens when her condition deteriorates further? Parkinson's is progressive, Marcus. She's going to get worse, not better. The brutal honesty of the statement hung in the air like smoke. Elena's hands stilled on the stovetop, her shoulders rigid with the effort of maintaining composure. We all deteriorate, Marcus replied quietly. Age, injury, illness, none of us come with guarantees. But we don't abandon people because they might become inconvenient. This isn't about abandonment, Rebecca said, shuffling her papers with sharp efficiency. It's about realistic planning. You're 58 years old. Marcus, you need to think about your own future, not take on additional responsibilities that could bankrupt you. Elena turned from the stove, her dark eyes blazing with suppressed emotion. Mrs. Thompson, may I speak plainly? Rebecca nodded, perhaps surprised by Elena's direct approach. You're absolutely right about my condition, Elena said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Parkinson's is progressive and unpredictable. I may have years of good function ahead of me, or my symptoms may accelerate rapidly. No one can predict which path my case will follow. She moved to the table and sat across from Rebecca, meeting her gaze directly. But you're making the same mistake everyone makes when they look at chronic illness, Elena continued. You're seeing the disease instead of the person. You're calculating costs instead of considering contributions. You're planning for failure instead of working toward success. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, clearly not accustomed to being challenged so eloquently. I worked for 5 years with a family in Denver, Elena went on. Beautiful children, successful parents, everything money could buy. But there was no soul in that house, no real connection between the people who lived there. I kept their lives organized, but I couldn't make them meaningful. Elena's voice grew stronger as she spoke, passion overriding her usual reserve. Here, on this ranch, I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. Purpose that goes beyond paychecks, relationships that matter, work that connects me to something larger than myself. Yes, I have Parkinson's. Yes, it will probably get worse. But right now, today, I'm living a life that has meaning and value. She stood up, her movement deliberate and dignified. You want to reduce me to a line item in a budget spreadsheet, but I refuse to be diminished that way. I'm Elena Rodriguez, and I happen to have Parkinson's disease. The disease doesn't define me, and it certainly doesn't eliminate my right to choose how I want to live. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock and the distant sound of cattle lowing in the morning air. Rebecca stared. at Alina with an expression that might have been surprise or grudging respect. "That's quite a speech," Rebecca said finally. "It's quite a life," Alina replied simply. Marcus felt a surge of pride and admiration that threatened to overwhelm him. Alina had faced down his sister's corporate efficiency with grace and strength, refusing to be intimidated or dismissed. In that moment, he realized that somewhere along the way, his feelings for Alina had evolved far beyond employer concern or even friendship. The day proceeded with careful politeness, Rebecca observing ranch operations with the detached air of a consultant conducting an assessment. She watched Alina work with the horses, noting her adaptations and limitations. She reviewed feed schedules and grazing rotations, grudgingly acknowledging the improvements Alina had implemented. She even joined them for the afternoon cattle check, riding silently while Alina coordinated their movements via radio. That evening, as Alina prepared dinner, Rebecca cornered Marcus on the front porch. "She's in love with you," Rebecca said without preamble. Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. "What?" "Alina. She's in love with you, and unless I'm completely misreading the situation, the feeling is mutual." Marcus set down his cup, his mind reeling. "Rebecca, that's obvious to anyone with eyes," Rebecca interrupted. "The question is whether you're going to acknowledge it or continue pretending this is purely a business arrangement." "It's complicated," Marcus said weakly. "Because of her illness?" "Because of everything. The age difference, the employer-employee dynamic, her medical situation. There are too many variables, too many ways it could go wrong." Rebecca studied her brother's face in the fading light. "You know what I see when I look at you two together. I see two people who found something rare and precious, and they're too scared to claim it because life might be difficult." "Life is difficult," Marcus pointed out, "especially with a progressive disease in the mix." "Life was difficult with Sarah too," Rebecca said gently. "Cancer doesn't give you any more certainty than Parkinson's. But you didn't let that stop you from loving her." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching Alina's silhouette move through the kitchen window. "Sarah and I had 20 good years before she got sick. Alina and I might have 5 or 2 or 10. There's no way to know. So you're going to waste whatever time you might have together because you're afraid of losing it eventually?" The brutal logic of Rebecca's question hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on protecting Alina and himself from potential future pain that he'd ignored the possibility of present happiness. "Besides," Rebecca continued, "I've spent 3 days watching that woman work. Her physical limitations are real, but her spirit is unbreakable. She's not going to fade away quietly, Marcus. She's going to fight for every good day she can get." Inside the house, Alina was setting the table for dinner, her movements careful but confident. She'd adapted to her condition with remarkable grace, finding ways to maintain independence while accepting help when necessary. Watching her now, Marcus realized that Rebecca was right about more than just his feelings. "There's something else," Rebecca said, pulling out her phone. "I made some calls today to colleagues in the healthcare finance sector. There are experimental programs for early-onset Parkinson's patients, research studies that provide free treatment in exchange for participation." Marcus turned to stare at his sister. "What kind of programs?" "Cutting-edge stuff. New medications, deep brain stimulation techniques, even some experimental genetic therapies. The catch is that participants have to meet specific criteria and be willing to travel for treatment." "Why are you telling me this?" Rebecca smiled, the first genuine warmth she'd shown since arriving. "Because despite what you might think, I don't want to see you miserable. And because Alina is, well, she's remarkable. If there's a chance these programs could help her, she deserves to know about them." Dinner that evening carried a different energy, with Rebecca asking Alina detailed questions about her symptoms, treatment history, and future plans. Alina answered honestly, describing both her hopes and fears with the same directness she'd shown that morning. "Have you heard of the Morrison Institute in Chicago?" Rebecca asked as they finished dessert. Elena shook her head. Should I have? They're conducting trials on a new drug therapy that's showing promising results for early onset cases, Rebecca explained. The treatment is completely free for study participants, and they provide travel and housing allowances. Elena's eyes widened. What kind of results? Significant symptom improvement in 60% of participants. Complete stabilization in another 20%. It's not a cure, but it could buy you years of good function. Marcus leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. What's the catch? 6 months of intensive treatment in Chicago, followed by 5 years of monitoring and follow-up visits. It's a major commitment, but the potential benefits are enormous. Elena was quiet for several minutes, processing this unexpected information. Why would you research this for me? Rebecca's expression softened. Because I was wrong about you. This morning I saw a liability, someone who would drain my brother's resources and energy. But today I've seen someone who brings life and purpose to this place. If there's a way to help you stay healthy longer, everyone benefits. That night, as Elena researched the Morrison Institute on the ranch's ancient computer, Marcus found himself on the porch again, staring out at the star-filled Montana sky. Rebecca's words echoed in his mind, forcing him to confront feelings he'd been carefully avoiding for months. Elena emerged from the house, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cool night air. She moved to the porch railing, standing close enough that Marcus could smell the faint scent of her soap. "Penny for your thoughts," she said softly. "Just thinking about Chicago," Marcus replied, which was partly true. "It's an amazing opportunity," Elena said. "But 6 months is a long time to be away from the ranch." "It is." Elena turned to face him, her expression serious in the moonlight. "Marcus, if I do this program, if I'm gone for 6 months, would you wait for me?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications and unspoken feelings. Marcus looked into Elena's eyes and saw his own emotions reflected there. Love, fear, hope, and uncertainty all tangled together. "Elena," he began, then stopped, struggling to find words for feelings that seemed too large for language. "I know it's presumptuous," Elena said quickly. "I know there are complications, practical considerations." "Elena," Marcus said again, more firmly this time. "If you do this program, I'll be right here when you get back. The ranch will be here, Dutch will be here, and I'll be here. For as long as you want us to be." Elena's smile was radiant in the moonlight. "Is that a promise?" "It's a promise," Marcus confirmed, finally acknowledging what his heart had known for months. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The Montana wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying with it the promise of change and the possibility of hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult decisions, but tonight, under the vast western sky, 2 people had finally found the courage to claim the love that had been growing between them all along. The acceptance letter from the Morrison Institute arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, its official letterhead stark against the pile of ranch correspondence that Dutch had brought from town. Elena stared at the document for a full minute before her hands began shaking too violently to continue reading. "Marcus," she called, her voice barely carrying across the kitchen. He emerged from his office, took one look at her face, and knew immediately what the letter contained. "Good news or bad news?" "Good news, I think," Elena whispered, handing him the letter. "They accepted me into the trial program." Marcus read quickly, his eyes scanning the detailed requirements and timeline. Elena would need to report to Chicago by January 15th for 6 months of intensive treatment, including experimental medication protocols, advanced physical therapy, and experimental procedures that might significantly slow her disease progression. "This is incredible," Marcus said, with genuine excitement in his voice. "Elena, this could change everything for you." But Elena didn't look excited. She looked terrified. 6 months, she said, sinking into a kitchen chair. 6 months away from everything familiar, surrounded by strangers, being poked and prodded. And studied like a laboratory animal. Marcus sat across from her, reaching for her trembling hands. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. The choice is entirely yours. But I should want to, shouldn't I? Elena's eyes filled with tears. This is the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to fight this disease with cutting-edge medicine. What kind of person would turn that down? The kind of person who values quality of life over quantity, Marcus said gently. The kind of person who understands that some things matter more than experimental treatments. Elena pulled her hands free and walked to the window, staring out at the ranch that had become her world. The cattle were visible in the distance, dark shapes against the brown winter grass. Dutch was mending fence near the barn, his movements economical and purposeful. It was a scene of simple productivity and contentment that had come to represent everything Elena valued about her new life. When I was growing up in El Paso, Elena said suddenly, my grandmother used to tell me stories about curandera healers, who could cure anything with the right combination of herbs and prayers. I always wondered why people still got sick if such powerful medicine existed. Marcus remained silent, sensing that Elena needed to work through her thoughts aloud. My grandmother finally explained it to me when I was older, Elena continued. She said healing wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about finding peace with what couldn't be fixed. Some people spent their whole lives chasing cures, instead of learning to live well with their limitations. And you think that's what you'd be doing in Chicago? Elena turned back to face him, her expression more settled than it had been since the letter arrived. I think I've already found my healing here, Marcus. Not a cure for Parkinson's, but something more valuable. A life worth living, regardless of what my body does or doesn't do. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Martinez, who had driven up from Denver to discuss the Chicago opportunity in person. Elena had called her immediately after receiving the acceptance letter, and the neurologist had rearranged her schedule to provide guidance for such an important decision. This is an extraordinary opportunity, Dr. Martinez said after reviewing the program details. The Morrison Institute is conducting some of the most promising Parkinson's research in the world. Their preliminary results suggest they may have found ways to actually halt disease progression in early onset cases. But, Elena prompted, hearing the unspoken caveat in the doctor's tone. But experimental treatments come with risks, Dr. Martinez admitted. Unknown side effects, psychological stress from intensive medical monitoring, and the possibility that the treatments won't work for your specific case. There's also the question of what happens after the trial period ends. Marcus leaned forward. What do you mean? If the experimental treatments prove effective for Elena, she need to continue them indefinitely, Dr. Martinez explained. The medications being tested aren't yet approved by the FDA, which means long-term access isn't guaranteed. She could experience significant improvement during the trial, only to lose those gains when the study concludes. Elena felt her heart sink. So I could get better for 6 months, then go back to where I started? It's possible, Dr. Martinez said honestly. The researchers are working toward FDA approval, but that process could take years. In the meantime, trial participants exist in a kind of medical limbo. The three of them sat in Elena's small living room in the guest cottage, surrounded by the simple furnishings and personal touches that had made the space feel like home. Elena's medication schedule was taped to the refrigerator, her physical therapy exercises outlined on handwritten cards scattered across the coffee table. It was a life carefully constructed around her limitations, but filled with genuine contentment. There's something else to consider, Dr. Martinez added gently. The psychological impact of leaving your support system. Elena, you've built something remarkable here. A life that accommodates your condition while allowing you to thrive. Disrupting that for experimental treatment could be more harmful than helpful. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude toward the neurologist for articulating what he'd been afraid to say. Elena's stability and happiness weren't accidents. They were the result of careful adaptation and the support of people who understood her value beyond her medical diagnosis. "What would you do?" Elena asked Dr. Martinez directly. "If you were in my position, what would you choose?" Dr. Martinez was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the competing demands of medical opportunity and personal well-being. "Honestly," she said finally, "I'd ask myself what I was hoping to gain from the treatment. If I wanted more time, I might take the risk. But if I was already living the life I wanted, I might decide that 6 good months here are worth more than 6 uncertain months in Chicago." After Dr. Martinez departed, Elena and Marcus walked out to the horse paddock where Duchess was enjoying the weak November sunshine. The Mare approached the fence immediately, nuzzling Elena's trembling hand with the gentle affection that had developed between them over months of daily interaction. "She doesn't care about my tremor," Elena said, stroking the horse's velvet nose. "She doesn't worry about my prognosis or calculate the cost of my medications. She just knows I show up every day with carrots and kindness." Marcus understood the deeper meaning behind Elena's observation. The ranch had become a place where her worth wasn't measured by her symptoms or her potential for improvement. She was valued for who she was, not for what she might become with. Experimental treatment. "I've made my decision," Elena said, her voice strong and certain. "I'm going to decline the Chicago program." Marcus felt simultaneous relief and concern. "Are you sure? This might be your only chance at something like this." "I'm sure," Elena replied. "I spent the first months after my diagnosis running from this disease, trying to outrun it or hide from it. Coming here, finding this life, has taught me that running isn't the answer. Fighting isn't always the answer either. Sometimes the answer is learning to dance with your limitations instead of constantly battling against them." That evening, Elena composed her letter to the Morrison Institute, politely declining their offer and thanking them for the opportunity. She wrote about her decision to focus on quality of life rather than experimental treatments, about finding peace with uncertainty, and about choosing love over fear. Marcus read the letter before she sealed it, impressed by Elena's eloquence and wisdom. She had found a way to explain her choice that honored both the medical opportunity she was declining and the life she was choosing to embrace. "No regrets?" Marcus asked as Elena addressed the envelope. "None," Elena said firmly. "The only regret I have is that it took me 34 years to find a place where I belonged. I'm not giving that up for anything, not even the possibility of a cure." The next few weeks brought a different kind of peace to the Double H. With the Chicago decision behind them, Elena and Marcus settled into the rhythms of winter ranch life with renewed appreciation for their daily routines. Elena's condition continued its gradual progression, but she adapted to each new challenge with grace and creativity. She developed a system for managing cattle feed that accommodated her tremor while maintaining efficiency. She created detailed, written protocols for ranch operations that would help Marcus and Dutch maintain consistency even when her own participation varied. Most importantly, she began training Marcus in the organizational skills that had made her so valuable, ensuring that her contributions would continue even if her physical capabilities declined. "You're preparing me to manage without you," Marcus observed one afternoon as Elena walked him through her filing system for veterinary records. "I'm preparing you to manage with me," Elena corrected. "My role might change as my condition progresses, but I'm not going anywhere unless you ask me to leave." The quiet confidence in her voice told Marcus everything he needed to know about Elena's commitment to their life together. She wasn't planning for failure or anticipating abandonment. She was simply adapting to reality while maintaining hope for the future. Christmas approached with a different energy than previous years. Elena threw herself into holiday preparations with the enthusiasm of someone celebrating her first real Christmas in years. She ordered special ornaments from town, planned elaborate meals that showcased her adapted cooking techniques, and even convinced Marcus to cut a pine tree from the back 40 for the ranch house living room. Sarah used to do this, Marcus said. As they decorated the tree together, Elena directing while Marcus handled the higher branches. She'd turn the whole house into a winter wonderland. Do you mind? Elena asked, suddenly uncertain. I don't want to intrude on your memories. Marcus paused in his ornament hanging, considering the question seriously. No, he said finally. Sarah would want this house to be filled with joy again. She'd like knowing that Christmas mattered here again. Elena smiled, the expression radiant. In the glow of the tree lights. Then we'll make it the best Christmas this ranch has seen in years. The promise felt like more than holiday enthusiasm. It felt like a commitment to building new traditions while honoring old ones, to creating a future that respected the past without being imprisoned by it. On Christmas Eve, as snow began falling softly outside the ranch house windows, Elena and Marcus sat by the fire sharing stories from their childhoods. Elena's memories of El Paso Christmases filled with extended family and traditional foods. Marcus's recollections of ranch holidays when his parents were alive and the house rang with laughter. Next year, Elena said, watching the flames dance. In the fireplace, I want to invite Dr. Martinez and Father Santos for Christmas dinner, and Martha and Dutch, of course. Maybe some of the other neighbors. Planning ahead? Marcus teased gently. Planning to live, Elena replied. Planning to build something lasting here. Something that acknowledges both where we've been and where we're going. Marcus reached for her hand, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. I love that plan. I love you. The words came easily now, no longer weighted with uncertainty or fear. Elena's response was equally simple and profound. I love you. Too, Parkinson's and all. Outside, the snow continued falling, blanketing the ranch in pristine white that would soon be marked by cattle tracks and boot prints. But for now, in the warmth of the ranch house, two people who had found each other against all odds were planning a future that embraced both possibility and limitation with equal grace. Spring arrived early at the Double H, bringing with it the annual ritual of calving season that would test every rancher's skill and endurance. Marcus stood in the pre-dawn darkness of the calving barn, watching a first-time heifer struggle through a difficult birth. His hands were steady as he assisted the laboring animal, but his mind was on Elena, who had insisted on taking the midnight shift despite her increasingly unpredictable symptoms. Easy girl, Marcus murmured to the heifer as the calf finally emerged, wet and steaming in the cool air. That's the hard part done. Elena appeared in the barn doorway, moving carefully in the dim light. Her left side had grown noticeably weaker. Over the winter months, and morning stiffness now lasted well into the afternoon. But her dedication to the ranch work had only intensified, as if she was determined to prove her value while she still could. Number 47? Elena asked, consulting the clipboard that had become a permanent fixture in her right hand. Healthy bull calf, Marcus confirmed, helping the newborn to its feet. Mother and baby are both doing well. Elena made careful notes on her chart, her handwriting larger and more deliberate than it had been a year ago. She'd adapted her record-keeping system to accommodate her tremor, using a thick-gripped pen and simplified notation that she could manage even on her worst days. 3 more first-time mothers in the North Pasture, Elena reported. The Dutch are keeping an eye on them, but he thinks we might have twins with number 52. Marcus nodded, appreciating Lana's organizational skills even as he worried about her stamina. Calving season was exhausting for healthy ranchers, but Elena pushed herself through 18-hour days with the same determination she brought to everything else. Why don't you get some rest? Marcus suggested gently. I can handle the morning checks. I'm fine, Elena replied automatically, but Marcus noticed how she braced herself against the barn wall for support. Besides, I want to see the twins born. By mid-morning, the ranch buzzed with activity as neighbors arrived to help with the busiest day of calving season. Tom Henderson brought his sons and a thermos of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Martha Sullivan appeared with sandwiches and medical supplies for both human and bovine emergencies. Even Father Santos showed up, claiming he'd always wanted to witness the miracle of birth firsthand. Elena coordinated the volunteers with quiet efficiency, assigning tasks based on each person's strengths and experience. Her tremor was more pronounced under stress, but her mind remained sharp and her instructions clear. Marcus watched with pride as she transformed a potentially chaotic situation into a well-orchestrated operation. Elena's got quite a gift for this, Tom Henderson observed as they worked together to assist another difficult birth. She's thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else. She's remarkable, Marcus agreed, then paused as he noticed Elena stumbling slightly as she crossed the barn. The tremor had spread to her legs more noticeably in recent weeks, affecting her balance in ways that concerned him. The twins arrived just after noon, 2 perfect heifer calves that sent a cheer through the assembled volunteers. Elena's face lit up with joy as she recorded the births, her excitement momentarily overriding the fatigue that had been building all morning. "That makes 18 healthy calves this season," she announced to the group. "Best birthing year the Double H has had in decades." The celebration was interrupted by Dutch's urgent call from the far pasture. "Got a heifer in trouble out here. Breech presentation, and she's getting tired fast." Marcus grabbed his veterinary kit while Elena climbed into the passenger seat of the ranch truck, despite his protests that she should rest. The drive to the pasture was bumpy and quick, Elena gripping her clipboard tightly to keep her tremor from making her notes illegible. The heifer was indeed in distress, lying on her side and breathing heavily as she struggled with a complicated delivery. Marcus examined her quickly, his experienced hands determining the position of the calf inside. "We need to turn the calf before we can deliver it," Marcus explained to the gathered volunteers. "It's going to take patience and very careful work." Elena positioned herself near the heifer's head, her voice calm and soothing as she spoke to the frightened animal. "Easy, Mama. We're going to help you and your baby. Just breathe with me." The delivery took over an hour, with Marcus working carefully to reposition the calf while Elena maintained her vigil at the heifer's head. Her left hand trembled constantly now, but her right hand remained steady as she stroked the animal's neck and whispered encouragement. When the calf finally emerged, alive and healthy despite the difficult birth, the exhausted heifer immediately began cleaning her newborn. Elena's tears of relief mixed with the sweat of exertion on her face. "Another healthy pair," she said, making notes with hands that shook more violently than Marcus had ever seen. "That makes 20 calves for the season." But as Elena attempted to stand, her legs gave out completely. She collapsed to the ground, her body seized by tremors that seemed to consume her entire frame. Marcus was beside her instantly, his medical training from years of ranch emergencies kicking in. "Elena, look at me," he said firmly, supporting her head as the tremors gradually subsided. "Just breathe. You're okay." The assembled volunteers gathered around anxiously, but Elena waved them away with embarrassed determination. "I'm fine, just tired. Too much excitement." But Marcus could see the fear in her eyes, the recognition that her condition had taken another step forward when she wasn't ready. This wasn't the gradual progression they'd been managing. This was a significant decline that couldn't be ignored or adapted away. "We're going to the hospital," Marcus said, his tone brooking no argument. "Marcus, no," Elena protested weakly. "It's calving season. You can't leave now." "Tom, Dutch, can you handle things here for a few hours?" Marcus called out. "Go," Tom replied immediately. "We've got everything under control." The drive to Billings was tense and quiet. Elena huddled in the passenger seat with a blanket around her shoulders. The tremors had mostly stopped, but she seemed smaller somehow. diminished by the frightening display of her disease's progression. "I'm scared," Elena admitted as they pulled into the hospital parking lot. "What if this is the beginning of the rapid decline Dr. Martinez warned us about?" Marcus took her hand, feeling the slight tremor that never completely disappeared anymore. "Then we deal with it. Together. But let's not borrow trouble until we know what we're actually facing." Dr. Patricia Kellerman, the neurologist on call, was thorough in her examination of Elena. Blood tests, reflex checks, and a detailed review of Elena's medication schedule painted a picture of disease progression that was faster than optimal, but not catastrophic. "Your episode today was likely triggered by exhaustion and stress," Dr. Kellerman explained. "Calving season would be demanding for anyone, but with Parkinson's, physical and emotional stress can dramatically amplify symptoms, so this isn't permanent?" Elena asked hopefully. "The underlying progression is ongoing," Dr. Kellerman said honestly. "But today's episode was probably a temporary exacerbation. With rest and possibly some medication adjustments, you should see improvement." She recommended increasing Elena's morning medication dose and adding an afternoon supplement to help with the tremor control. More importantly, she stressed the need for Elena to recognize her limitations and adjust her activities accordingly. "You're going to have to be smarter about managing your energy," Dr. Kellerman advised. "Push too hard and you'll experience more episodes like today. Pace yourself and you can maintain good function for much longer." The drive home was thoughtful rather than fearful, both Elena and Marcus processing the implications of the day's events. Elena's condition was progressing, but it wasn't the medical emergency they'd feared. It was simply the next phase of a journey they'd already committed to traveling together. "I need to start training someone to take over more of the ranch coordination," Elena said as they turned onto the ranch road. "Maybe Martha's daughter Jessica. She's smart and organized, and she could use the part-time work." Marcus appreciated Elena's practical approach to planning for her limitations, but he also heard the sadness beneath her pragmatic tone. Each adaptation was also a loss, another piece of independence surrendered to the progression of her disease. "We'll figure it out," Marcus assured her. "But you're not being replaced, Elena. You're evolving your role to match your capabilities." That evening, as the ranch settled into the quiet rhythms of a successful calving day, Elena sat on the porch wrapped in her favorite blanket. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and the sounds of contented cattle drifted across the pastures. Marcus joined her, carrying 2 cups of herbal tea that had become part of Elena's evening medication routine. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the day fade into night. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked suddenly. "Taking on someone with a chronic illness? Your life would be so much simpler without me." Marcus set down his tea and turned to face her fully. "Elena Rodriguez, you are the best thing that's happened to this ranch in 20 years. Your illness is part of you, but it's not the most important part. Your intelligence, your compassion, your incredible work ethic, those things matter. More than your tremor. Even when I collapse in the middle of calving season?" "Especially then," Marcus said firmly. "Because you collapsed after working 18 hours straight to ensure every calf on this ranch was born safely. That's not weakness, Elena. That's dedication beyond anything I have a right to expect." Elena leaned against Marcus's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "I love you," she said simply. "And I love this life we've built together. I just want to be able to contribute for as long as possible." "You will," Marcus promised. "We'll adapt as we need to, but you'll always be an essential part of this operation. Disease or no disease, you're family now." As the stars emerged in the clear Montana sky, Elena felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. Today had been frightening, a reminder of the uncertain path ahead. But it had also demonstrated the strength of the support system she'd found at the Double H. Whatever challenges came next, she wouldn't face them alone. The ranch slept peacefully that night, 20 healthy calves nestled close to their mothers. In the spring grass, and in the ranch house, 2 people who had found love against all odds planned for a future that would require flexibility, courage, and an unshakable commitment to facing whatever came next together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as all tomorrows did on a working ranch. But tonight, surrounded by the fruits of their shared labor and the promise of their continued partnership, Elena and Marcus rested in the knowledge that they had built something worth fighting for, something that could weather any storm their future might bring. 2 years later, the Double H Ranch had transformed into something neither Marcus nor Elena could have imagined when she first answered his advertisement in the Billings Gazette. What had begun as a simple employer-employee arrangement had evolved into a thriving partnership that had revitalized not just the ranch, but the entire surrounding community. Elena stood at the kitchen window of their shared home. Marcus had moved her into the main house after their quiet wedding the previous spring, watching Jessica Sullivan direct the morning cattle feeding with the same methodical precision Elena had once brought to the task. At 23, Jessica had proven to be an apt student, absorbing Elena's organizational systems and adapting them for her own capabilities. The tremor in Elena's left hand was constant now, and her mobility had declined significantly over the past year, but her mind remained sharp, and her role at the ranch had evolved rather than diminished. She now served as the operations strategic coordinator, using her analytical skills to optimize everything from grazing rotations to feed purchasing agreements. "The Henderson boys are here for the fence repair," Marcus called from the mudroom, his voice carrying the contentment that had become his default tone since Elena had agreed to marry him. Elena smiled, making a note on her tablet computer. A recent adaptation that allowed her to maintain detailed records despite her increasing difficulty with handwriting. The fence project was part of a larger cooperative effort among neighboring ranches, an initiative Elena had proposed to share resources and reduce costs for everyone involved. Dr. Martinez arrived for Elena's quarterly checkup just as the morning work was getting underway. The neurologist had become a friend over the years, her visits now combining medical assessment with genuine social connection. "You look well," Dr. Martinez observed as they settled in the living room for their consultation. "How are you managing the new symptoms?" "Some days are better than others," Elena replied honestly. "The speech therapy has helped with the voice changes, and the new medication routine keeps the tremor manageable most of the time." Marcus joined them, carrying the detailed symptom log he'd learned to maintain with the same precision he once applied to cattle breeding records. Elena's condition had progressed, but slowly and predictably, allowing them to adapt their routines and expectations accordingly. "The most important question," Dr. Martinez said, "is how you're feeling about your quality of life." Elena considered the question carefully, her gaze moving from Marcus to the window where she could see the ranch bustling with purposeful activity. Jessica was training 2 new volunteers in Elena's cattle management system. Dutch was demonstrating proper irrigation techniques to Tom Henderson's youngest son. Father Santos had arrived for his weekly visit, ostensibly to check on Elena, but actually because he'd become fascinated with ranch life. "I'm living exactly the life I want," Elena said finally. "It's different from what I imagined when I was younger, but it's mine. I have work that matters, people who depend on me, and love that accepts me completely as I am." Dr. Martinez smiled, making notes in Elena's file. "That's the best possible outcome for anyone, with or without Parkinson's." After the doctor departed, Elena made her way slowly to the guest cottage, which had been converted into her office and meeting space. The afternoon would bring a conference call with agricultural extension agents from 3 counties, discussing a sustainable grazing initiative that had grown from Alana's original research into a regional pilot program. Marcus found her there. An hour later, surrounded by charts and reports that detailed improvements in soil health and livestock productivity across multiple ranches. Elena's intellectual contributions had become so valuable that she'd been invited to speak at agricultural conferences, sharing her insights with ranchers across the western states. The extension agents want to expand the program statewide, Elena reported, her eyes bright with excitement despite the fatigue that shadowed her features. They think our results could be replicated on hundreds of ranches. That's incredible, Marcus said, settling into the chair beside her desk. You've created something that's going to help people for decades. Elena's smile was radiant. We've created something, she corrected. None of this would have been possible without the Double H as a testing ground, without your willingness to try new approaches. As the sun set behind the crazy mountains, painting the ranch in shades of gold and amber, Elena and Marcus walked slowly to the horse paddock where Duchess waited for her evening treat. Elena's gait was unsteady now, requiring Marcus's arm for support, but her face lit up when the mare approached the fence. She's getting old too, Elena observed, stroking Duchess's graying muzzle. But she's still beautiful, still valuable, still loved. Marcus understood the deeper meaning behind Elena's words. Age and illness might change the external circumstances of life, but they didn't diminish its essential worth. Elena had taught him that dignity wasn't about physical capability, it was about finding ways to contribute meaningfully regardless of limitations. The evening brought unexpected visitors in the form of the Whitmore family from Denver. Elena hadn't seen her former employers in 3 years, but they'd maintained contact through letters and occasional phone calls. Now they stood in the ranch house living room, clearly amazed by the transformation in Elena's circumstances. When you left us, we were heartbroken, Mrs. Whitmore admitted, watching Elena navigate her kitchen with practiced efficiency despite her obvious physical limitations. We thought you were making a terrible mistake, running away from people who cared about you. I wasn't running away, Elena replied, her voice stronger than it had been in months. I was running towards something I didn't even know I was looking for. The Whitmore children, now teenagers, peppered Elena with questions about ranch life and cattle management. Their genuine fascination with her new expertise was a stark contrast to the pity she'd feared when leaving their employment years earlier. You found your calling, Mr. Whitmore observed as they prepared to leave. We always knew you were capable of more than housework, but we never imagined anything like this. After their guests departed, Elena and Marcus sat on their porch under the vast Montana sky, surrounded by the quiet sounds of a ranch settling into sleep. The cattle were content in their pastures, the horses dozing in the barn, and the various projects and initiatives Elena had started were thriving under capable management. Do you think about the future? Elena asked, her hand finding Marcus's. In the darkness. About what comes next as my condition progresses, Marcus squeezed her fingers gently. I think about tomorrow, next week, and next season. Beyond that seems less important than making sure each day has meaning. I've been thinking about legacy, Elena continued. About what I want to leave behind when I can't actively contribute anymore. You've already created your legacy, Marcus said firmly. The grazing program, the cooperative initiatives, the training systems you've developed, those things will outlast both of us. Elena leaned against Marcus's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. I want to write it all down, she said. Create a manual for other ranchers dealing with similar challenges, whether it's illness or injury or just aging. Show them how to adapt their operations instead of giving up. That sounds like exactly the kind of project you should tackle, Marcus agreed. And I know just the person to help you organize and edit it. The idea energized Elena in a way that reminded Marcus of her early days at the ranch, when every challenge was an opportunity to prove her worth. Now she was past the need to prove anything, but her desire to help others remained as strong as ever. 6 months later, adapting with grace, A Rancher's Guide to Thriving Despite Limitations, was published by the State Agricultural Extension Service and distributed to rural communities across the West. Elena's combination of practical advice and personal experience resonated with readers facing their own challenges. From aging ranchers reluctant to retire to young farmers dealing with injuries or chronic conditions. The book's success led to speaking requests that Elena accepted selectively, sharing her story with agricultural groups and medical conferences. Her message was simple but profound. Limitations don't have to mean the end of meaningful contribution, and community support can transform individual challenges into collective strength. As Elena's 4th anniversary at the Double H approached, the ranch prepared for its biggest celebration yet. Friends and neighbors from across 3 counties planned to attend, along with medical professionals, agricultural researchers, and the extended network of people whose lives had been touched by Elena's example. 4 years ago, I came here thinking I was hiding from my diagnosis, Elena reflected as she and Marcus reviewed the guest list. I thought the ranch would be a place to fade away quietly, without anyone noticing my decline. Instead, you bloomed, Marcus said, his voice filled with the wonder that still surprised him sometimes. You found your purpose, your people, and yourself. Elena smiled, her tremor more pronounced but her spirit undimmed. I found us, she corrected, and discovered that love doesn't require perfection. It just requires honesty, courage, and the willingness to build something beautiful together. The anniversary celebration became an annual tradition, drawing visitors from around the country who wanted to see firsthand how the Double H had become a model for adaptive agriculture and inclusive community building. Elena's story had grown beyond personal triumph to become a beacon of hope for anyone facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. Years passed, seasons changed, and Elena's condition progressed as expected. But the ranch thrived, the community prospered, and the love between Elena and Marcus deepened with each challenge they faced together. They had proven that a life interrupted by illness could still be a life well lived, full of purpose, connection, and joy. In quiet moments, when the ranch was peaceful and their love felt as vast as the Montana sky above them, Elena and Marcus knew they had found something rare and precious, a partnership that transformed individual limitations into shared strength, creating a legacy that would inspire others long after their own story had ended. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.